français, mais la session va être en anglais because my technical French is really bad. So I can order a croissant and je me débrouille très bien, mais quand ça devient technique, je tombe en anglais. I hope it's okay for everybody, yeah, to speak in English. And I don't know whoever is going to be on Zoom and how well their French skills will be. So, very welcome. I'm glad to be here and happy to see so many still smiling faces. And I also see the sweet spot is not occupied so far, but that's fine, that's up to you. You'll take care of that during the session. 2, 3 little housekeeping things. So I have split the session into 2 parts. The first part is more like an informative presentation type of session where I have a little presentation with me. Probably you're going to see things that you already know, but maybe you also see things that you don't know. Because I don't know exactly, and that would be my second question, what is your level of knowledge in terms of immersive audio? Okay, so you're mixing in Atmos or something similar. And the others, you have experienced immersive audio yet? Cinema, movie, music, a sound bar, a car or something? Okay, good. So just saying, because a couple of things will not be new to none of you, but it's like we usually say, it's like, you know, repeating is making the knowledge a bit deeper, kind of. I don't know how to translate it into proper English, but that's basically it. So my name's Eric. I'm here with my colleague Steen. I'm based out of Berlin. Steen from Greenland. No, from Denmark, actually. We were joking this morning about Greenland and Canada and all the geopolitical things that we're not going to touch base today. So one of the golden rules when traveling is no politics. And then we're going to be good. But we have a lot of other things to talk about that is much more interesting and much more kind of entertaining than whatever's going on out there. So I'm based in Berlin. I'm working as a business development manager for Genelec. I have a long track record in immersive audio because I was building the first continental European Dolby Atmos studio in 2012 when it was still in post-production. That was under NDA, so it was not a public format at that time. But I was working in post-production, redoing a theatrical mixing stage, and then obviously when talking to Dolby for certification, they came up with that thing, hey, there is something new on the radar. And with a couple of different stops in between, I'm working for Genelec now for nearly 8 years, and I take care of everything that is immersive, because that's where I come from, that's what I do, that's what I live and breathe every day. I also run an own immersive mixing studio called Immersive Lab in Berlin, where I have done more than 1,400 songs in Atmos so far. So I hope I can share a bit of my experience and my knowledge with you and then talk you through the morning session. So first of all, most of you probably have heard of the name Genelec, but I don't know if anybody knows where we actually come from. We come from Finland. So Genelec is a family-owned Finnish company. As you can see on the map, I don't know if you know a little bit where Finland is in Europe. This is really at the end of the end of the end of the world. And it's a little town called Iisalmi, and in Iisalmi there are 20,000 people living there. It's a big brewery and Genelec, and a lot of mosquitoes. So that's basically it. And on the left-hand side you see the picture of our factory. So every loudspeaker in the whole world that has the name Genelec on it has been produced here and then shipped to the world. So we do everything, we build everything, we design everything. Every process is happening in Finland. So the right part of the building is basically administration, showroom. The middle part is the production, and the left part is our little warehouse. And it's a beautiful area. And at this time of the year, we do have around 2.5 hours of like night. So literally no night, because it's very north. But I think in Canada there are similar regions where you can experience this kind of day-night timeline. So today we're going to cover the topic, the big buzz topic of immersive audio. Now, knowing that this is a topic that we could talk for probably a whole week, yeah, and big white paper conference sessions and what have you, but I try to keep it practical and to keep it like hands-on and kind of digest it to the most easy way of using it. If there's any question during the session, please raise your hand, shoot them anytime. I want to make it an interactive session. I'm not the preacher and preaching the immersive Bible. You know, I'm happy that we can get into a discussion. So before we start and getting like into deeper things. I just wanted to recap on the different commercially available immersive audio formats that are available on the market that actually play a role. I mean, knowing that there are many kind of niche format and academic stuff and so on, there's plenty of stuff. But obviously the most important one, and also probably the reason why we're all sitting here, is Dolby Atmos, obviously. Has been introduced in 2012, is what I would call a hybrid sound format between object and channel-based audio, but we'll cover that. But I think very important is to understand, where does Dolby Atmos actually live? So which applications are used? And it starts obviously with cinema, that's where it comes from. It went over home cinema, into music production, broadcast, automotive, and gaming is becoming more and more important for all immersive audio, but also for Atmos. But the other big format that is available in the market that is actually a little bit older and has been developed before Atmos is actually Auro 3D. Do you know Auro 3D? Have you heard about Auro 3D? It's a development from a Belgian studio called Galaxy Sound in Belgium. Wilfried van Bijlen, he's basically the founder of Auro 3D. And Auro 3D has been the first commercially available immersive sound format. But unfortunately, it doesn't have the same economic power than the guys from San Francisco, which can just run a format into every little country of the world. So Auro 3D, it's a bit more difficult for them. But for music production, it's a very important format we're going to cover later. And it's mainly a channel-based format, but it has an object-based section called Auro Max. I'm not going to cover that too much because it's not so widely known, but we just have to understand that even Auro 3D comes originally from cinema. So in India, a couple of cinemas are actually equipped with Auro 3D. But for Auro 3D, something very important is all the home cinema market, because a lot of Blu-rays do have Dolby Atmos, Auro 3D, and DTS:X as sound formats on the Blu-rays. And most of consumer devices like AVRs and things like that are capable of decoding Auro 3D today. So that's a big, big part. And in music, there's a new streaming format now, or two, that I'm going to show you, where Auro 3D is becoming more relevant, well, luckily. But four other formats that are coming. One is called MPEG-H. Have you heard about MPEG-H? Yeah. So MPEG-H is a development from a German research lab, Fraunhofer. Those were the guys who tried to destroy the music industry with MP3 back in the days. So anyways, it's a research lab in Germany, state-owned, and they come up with all kind of different formats and technologies, and then license this out commercially to certain environments. And MPEG-H is one of the big competitors to Dolby Atmos when it comes to broadcast, and what we call NGA, so next generation audio. So for instance, I don't know about the Eurovision Song Contest, if you heard about this, which is probably the biggest thing in Europe. Once a year, it always gets broadcasted in MPEG-H and in Dolby Atmos. TV Globo in Brazil, for instance, whatever they do immersive, it is MPEG-H and not Atmos. There's a lot of installations and services in Asia as well with MPEG-H, so it's becoming more important. And then there's Sony 360 reality audio that you probably have heard. And that is very important to know, because MPEG-H is actually the technical foundation for Sony 360. So Sony 360 as a format is using the MPEG-H technology to build on that, and has been introduced in 2019 by Sony. They try to kind of do it purely in music and broadcast. Well, I heard that there are some tests of broadcast, but it's mainly in Japan, not outside of Japan. But for music, it could be an interesting format that we have to have on the radar when we talk about music and immersive. Two new things that came up just last year. Maybe you have heard about Eclipsa Audio. Eclipsa Audio is a audio format that is based on the IAMF format, which is an open source immersive audio multi-channel format that is a consortium of Google, Samsung, Apple was part, Microsoft, Oracle. So all big tech companies try to find a way how to build like an open source immersive format that they can use and transcode into certain of their own technologies. And Eclipsa Audio is basically a company that has built plugins. So we can use that format like we do it with Atmos or Sony 360 to make it usable for people like us who are not kind of command line coders, but we're like audio engineers. So, and Eclipse Audio is supported by YouTube, or is in the process of being supported by YouTube. So in the future, more and more Eclipse Audio immersive mixes can be transmitted via YouTube, which is actually a good thing because YouTube is a big platform where people consume content. And it has always been difficult to get immersive content into that channel, so to speak. And then there's the ASAF, the Apple Spatial Audio Format. That is something that they showed us last year. And there is a codec around this, which is called APAC. It's not Asia Pacific, it's Apple Positional Audio Codec, which means the foundation is actually Dolby Atmos mix, or you can actually feed a Dolby Atmos mix in there. But the reason why they've built this is mainly for the Apple Vision Pro thing. And with the Apple Vision Pro, you're not tied to a sweet spot because you can move in a room. You know, that's also part of that whole experience. Now what happens in the background is you underlay an immersive mix, plus you add like positional reference of you in relative position to the different speakers. So it's basically rendering in real time your position when you walk closer to a source like this speaker, that it starts to render it for your, basically as a, if you understand what I mean, so an immersive mix plus the location in 3D space. So it's actually quite interesting, but it's mainly for VR applications. So for us in studio applications or in private consumer home cinema environments, this is, let's see where this takes us. But it's very interesting that Apple is putting a lot of development into spatial audio, immersive audio, next generation experiences, etc. So when we'll go back to Dolby Atmos and we'll look at the most common speaker setups that exist in the market. So Dolby Atmos can actually grow from the base configuration, which is a 5.1.2 layout, going up to 22 speakers. And the system that we're going to have here today for you is a 9.1.4. So we have 9 speakers on ear height, we have one subwoofer channel, and then we have 4 top speakers. Well, we'll get to that in a second. For Dolby Atmos music, and for what we call home entertainment, so everything that is not theatrical work, we don't need any certification. So we can buy, ideally, 12 Genelec speakers and can start mixing and do commercial work without any certification anymore. That's not needed. So for Oro 3D, the setup looks a little bit different. So because it's a mainly channel-based system and it's also like inherited from theatrical positioning, we talk about systems like 9.1, 11.1, 13.1. At the end, it's the same. But 9.1 means we have a 5.1 on the lower plane, and when we have 4 height speakers. But one thing is different. In Atmos, the speakers are moved into the room above the audience, and in Oro 3D, it's basically a channel above the other channels. So what we would have would be a height right speaker, or a height left speaker, and a height surrounds, or a height center. And then there's something optional in Oro 3D, which is what they call the voice of God, which is a mono source right in the middle above the audience, which is sometimes very difficult to hang, like here, for instance. Yeah? But it's actually a 3-layer concept of how immersive audio is reproduced in this case. And that's different to Atmos, where we only have 2 layers. So it sounds slightly different, but it's an interesting approach. But we're gonna see some need for Oro 3D when we talk about what we call the orophonic microphone setups. Oro 3D is a channel-based system by default, meaning we don't need a rendering engine by default and can have a microphone per speaker, so to speak. So a lot of engineers and producers, especially in classical music, jazz music, fusion, etc., with acoustic rooms, build some kind of orophonic microphone setups where you have a big rig of microphones, which has 7 microphones on the lower plane, then 4 pointing to the ceiling, and they put that microphone at the position where they want the listener later to be and to sit. So there are a couple of very interesting recordings from an engineer from Norway called Morten Lindberg. Maybe you have heard about him. He won, I don't know how many Grammys, and He was also co-producer of the Justin Gray album, the Canadian winning album the last time. And Morten is only working with that setup. So he places the microphone where he wants the listener, and then he's placing the musicians around. So when he decides, oh, I don't know, the trumpets are too loud, you guys take your chair 5 meters back. So with the distance to the microphone. And if something is too harsh, he's just angling the microphone. You know, that's the way how he's working. It's exceptional work, and it's actually easy to do when you have a good room and some good musicians and good microphones, that you just place the microphones where you have speakers later and hit play. That's it. So it is a very interesting concept, and I can also show you some examples later of that. This, now going into the music production world, this is just a picture from our friends in Dolby. That's the automotive headquarter in Germany. They like Genelec, so that's why I put that picture here. We're speaking a lot about numbers, you know, 7.1.4, 9.1.4, 916. I mean, this might be known to many of you, but I think it's always good to have it as a recap and to show what the others are doing. So 714, for instance, means 7 speakers at ear height, 1 subwoofer channel, and then we have 4 ceiling speakers. Now, Oro 3D does it different because they call it 11.1 or 13.1. But the equivalent to a 714 would be called 11.1. They just call it 11.1, but it means exactly the same. So 7 speakers on ear height, in this case, 1 subwoofer channel and 4 top speakers, or 5 height layers, 1 voice of God, and if you do the math, then you get to these interesting numbers. And now comes our friends from Japan, because they like to do it very different. They, for instance, call it 13.0. So that's the standard configuration of a Sony 360 music production environment. You already see one thing that is kind of interesting. So we have 5 speakers on ear height. We have another ring of 5 in the ceiling. And then we have 3 speakers in front of us, like low left, low center, low right. If your studio doesn't have any console or desk or something, that is something that could be done. But most studios have something sitting in front of you, keyboards, desks, controllers, what have you. So those speakers would probably always be masked. So if you really want to do Sony 360, you should think about this from the beginning when designing the room to make sure that your furniture is actually capable of having correct angles and well, acoustic vision of the speakers to your position. But that's just the way how the Sony guys work. And the reason why they have lower speakers is because Sony 360 is working in a 360 sphere approach and not only a dome approach. So they take the whole spherical thing and can place sound below you because it's mainly on headphones. Also, this might be known to many of you, but it's just a recap, is thinking about the difference between channel-based audio and object-based audio, because this is something that immersive audio will make use of in the future more and more and more and more, and it's actually already doing since day one. But just to understand what I would refer to channel-based audio. So we have a little sound on the left-hand side, which is my car, and I send it through a panner, could be a joystick or a console or a channel-based panning system, what have you, and we move it from the left over to the center, to the right. That's all fine. But the moment we pan that sound into the surrounds, looking from a theatrical approach, these 3 speakers would all be my right surround channel. So they would all play back that same sound at the same time. There's no positional difference between them. So my sound would be played back on the whole right side, and then it would be played back on the whole left side. So in channel-based audio, we are mixing into channels. Now with object-based audio, it works a bit different because we're not looking into channels anymore. We are looking into directions, you know, front left, rear left, top height or something. So I do have the same audio clip, but what I'm doing now is I'm adding positional reference information, metadata, X, Y, Z coordinates. And these 2 elements I'm sending into what we call a renderer. That's a piece of software or hardware that is sitting right at the heart of your studio, which knows how many speakers you have and where they are. And in some cases also how they are calibrated. But we do that differently. But that helps us to get much more precision into every speaker feed, because we can pan now the sound over every individual loudspeaker. anywhere in 3D space. And that's basically the beauty about object-based audio, that we're not tied to specific channels of loudspeakers. We have the whole sphere and the whole dome available for placing sound sources. Looking into speaker setups and how this actually works in various rooms. So first of all, of course, we have to understand what's the application that I want to do. So what format do I want to work with in my studio? Is it going to be Dolby Atmos? Is it going to be Auro 3D, Sony 360, or maybe a mix of all of three, which is also possible. Now, thinking about Dolby Atmos, these are kind of recommendations from Dolby for the minimum setup size. And Dolby is referring to something that they call the layout. Now, thinking of this room, for instance, this room is something like 13 by 8 meters. But our layout is much smaller because the layout is kind of measured in between the loudspeakers. So if you happen to own a 500 square meter loft, you know, rooftop view over the nicest city, and then you only have 20 square meters of that where you place your studio, that's your layout size. And that's also what comes into kind of a discussion and also calculation for how does your speaker setup actually look like. And the ideal, obviously, every time is building an equidistant room, because that is like a circle around the listening position with equidistant speaker distances, basically. But most rooms cannot do this. So probably the majority of rooms do have like a rectangular orthogonal shape. It's not a problem, but you can see, we're going to cover this a bit in more detail in the next slides. But yeah, the minimum size of a room that Dolby is recommending is 3 meter by 3.5 meter by 2.4 meter, which is fairly small. It's kind of a wardrobe approach, you know, very kind of small home cinema. So if you have the chance, I think 20 square meters is a good size, and 25 or something like that. But yeah, but it still works. Now, when it comes to choose the right speaker for the application, that is something that Dolby is very kind of interested to help you with, but also we in Genelec. We do have a little document that is called the Monitor Setup Guide. It's a PDF, you can download it, we can also send out the links later. And it's a very informative like brochure about the basics of room acoustic and loudspeaker placement. And this is something that applies to all brands, because physics is the same for everybody. So I mean, we're not treating physics differently just because we're from Finland. So yeah, we can cold. We can be very cold. But you could do that here as well. Anyways, but in the Monitor Setup Guide, you can see a couple of our models on the left-hand side. And then on the top row, you see the distance. And then with the graphs of green and red. So how far away do I need to sit, and what kind of SPL can I actually get depending on my listening distance. So this is not the most detailed slide, but it gives you, okay, good idea. So I have a 5 meter listening distance. I know that 8320, which is a 4-inch driver, might be a bit small. Okay, get it. Yeah. So, and that's how you can navigate through it. But also you have to understand what are actually the SPL requirements of the format that you're working in. So let's say, because mostly we're going to talk about Dolby Atmos today. If you want to work in Dolby Atmos home, so to speak, usually what Dolby is recommending is that every front speaker, so left, center, right, is capable of handling 99 dB SPL at the listening position. So now when you do the math, in this case we have a listening distance of around 3 meters, thinking of like 4 to 6 dB loss per meter added to the 99 dB. So that means this speaker, in this particular case, needs to be 115 dB or 117 dB to be appropriate for that. So it's kind of a heavy demand, I would say. It's pretty, I mean, you can scale speakers quite big just because of that. But not talking about theatrical. But this number of 99 dB SPL, for instance, I don't know if you know where this comes from. So Dolby is asking for a calibration level for home entertainment studios of 79 dB. And then they're adding 20 dB of headroom. That's basically the math behind that. And for theatrical, it's the same. It's 85 dB SPL plus 20 dB headroom. And that's basically what you would require per speaker at the listening position. And then, of course, it's a big question. Are you going to go with a 2-way loudspeaker, a 3-way loudspeaker, a coaxial design? So that's a couple of things that we could tune and angle. Another solution that you can use to choose the right speakers is the Dolby Atmos room design tool, the DART. This is DART. D and T is always a bit difficult, but we know that in German. We have a lot of words where it's that. Anyways, but it's actually fairly simple because in the top left corner, you just put in your layout length and width and height. You put your listening distance, your mixing position, and then in the drop-down menu, you can select actually all speaker manufacturers that are kind of measured and available. I would prefer to go to the letter G because that's where Genelec starts. And then you get all the models from Genelec and see which model actually works and which doesn't. And then it gives you the a color coding like green, yellow, and red. This is from my own studio in Berlin, my own immersive lab. You can see my subwoofer is a little bit orange, but that's fine. It's expensive, so we can work it out. But other than that, it actually works very nicely. And then on the right-hand side, if you want, you also get like a couple of drawings where you should place the speakers with some kind of annotations. But that's a very handy tool. It's available on the Dolby website, free of charge. And sometimes it's also nice when you're interested in building a studio or consulting people. This is the go-to helping tool to actually design proper rooms. From the positioning, that is no rocket science and nothing new and nothing down to Genelec because it's all based on ITU standards. Normally, the front speakers, you put them on 22 to 30 degrees out of the center. In this case, we have them at 30 degrees at the sweet spot, the unused sweet spot. It's good that everybody knows that that's the sweet spot because nobody's sitting there. The center is clear. And then the side surrounds, which are these ones, are angled to 90 to around 110 degrees. That's the window that you have to build or put up the speakers. Because that is an area in the studio where a lot of studios have either a window or a door or something, a shelf, what have you, an oven. And so that's why this angle window actually exists. Same for the back surrounds, 135 to 150 degrees. And it's always like measured from the center down to the axis. In this particular case, we have two more speakers, what we call the white speakers, left white and right white, which are these ones. And normally they sit at 45 degrees out of the center. Here they are at 50 degrees, but it's not a big problem because I thought it's good to build like a nice ring, but just so you know why they are slightly too far away, but calibration takes care. For the top speakers, it's so easy to say. When you build it, you see, okay, I need 5 lasers to find that correct position, but it's like finding a vertical line straight up, and then you fold 45 degrees to the front, 45 degrees to the side, and this is where you put a speaker. These are the Dolby recommendations. Now, when you talk to Oro 3D, because you think Oro 3D could also be an interesting format that you want to use in your studio to some way, they will tell you the top speakers should be at 30 degrees. Because that is like top right and top left. Now there's one angle where both formats meet. It's actually 38 degrees, where both are okay. So you could get a Dolby plug and you could get an Oro 3D plug at your wall, and then you're good. So 38 degrees is something that both formats can live with, and to be honest, it sounds absolutely okay. There's no issue. Even if I play an Oro 3D mix here or a Dolby Atmos mix on an Oro 3D system, we're good. We're safe. All right. Now looking into the topic of calibration and speaker calibration, because this is very, very important, especially for immersive audio applications. It is important for stereo, but for immersive, it's not important. It's mandatory due to various facts. First of all, we have to understand what is a good loudspeaker and how is it designed. So this is basically the aim of every loudspeaker manufacturer, to create a loudspeaker that has this frequency response in, obviously not a studio, but in an anechoic chamber, in a dead room. This is where also all the Genelec loudspeakers get calibrated and measured and then sent out. But the moment you take such a loudspeaker into any room, no matter how many millions of dollars you have put into acoustic treatment, you will have room interactions of your loudspeaker. So it's going to start to reflect, to build modes, to what have you, everything. So the flat frequency response that we just saw could easily look like this. This is nothing too dramatic, to be honest with you. This is actually absolutely normal. We see that every day in every studio. So what do we see? I mean, we see here like it's around 20 dB at 130 hertz, 140 hertz. So that is quite heavy. So what we need to do with that, because if we mix now on that loudspeaker, the bass would lack on every other system outside of our studio, obviously, because we don't hear it correct. We also have to understand how the basics of physics work for kind of sound radiation. So the lower the frequency is, the more omnidirectional every loudspeaker, and not only Genelec, every loudspeaker actually is reproducing the bass. And this is below 400 hertz. So below 400 hertz, it's like a omnidirectional sound wave going out. So that means the bass driver goes that way, but it also goes to the rear wall and comes back to you, well, timely delayed, but also sometimes at the same time. So it's causing all kind of irritations. The higher the frequency gets, the more the speakers actually are directive to your point. So that's also a reason why we in Genelec, but also other calibration systems, don't take so much care of everything below 500-600 hertz, because it simply doesn't make that much sense. All the issues in rooms are usually below 500-600 hertz. That's where the 98% of all the problems occur. Above, the wavelength at some point gets so small that when you move your head, that you're actually out of the calibration anymore. So it's not really mandatory to do much calibration above 600, 700, 800 hertz, unless you have some really severe things and you're, I don't know, your friend is a dentist and has a nice chair for you that keeps you like this in the sweet spot, then you could do this. But I think we all move a little bit, so that's why questionable. Anyways, so how do we do this in Genelec with our technology, with the SAM monitors? So SAM actually stands for Smart Active Monitoring. Little spoiler, that's the only little sales pitch that I have. It's going to take about 5 minutes and then we go back. Okay? So bear with me. So we do have internal DSPs in all our models. So we can communicate with DSPs in the loudspeaker and can tell the loudspeaker, please apply that kind of filter for your position in the room. We have a software called GLM, the Genelec Loudspeaker Manager, and with that software we're controlling that system. And all the parameters and settings are either stored on my computer when talking to the loudspeaker all the time, or I can store it right into the loudspeaker and then remove all the Ethernet cabling and the speakers waking up every time calibrated. That in particular is interesting for studios where there's a lot of freelancers coming in, or educational facilities where you don't want people who work there to mess with the calibration. So you store it into the speaker, you set and forget it, and then they're always going to wake up calibrated. And we also have a low power consumption and standby option. That means we can set up the loudspeaker to go in an idle mode, sleep mode, and then it's consuming, this size of speakers consuming around 1 watt. It's okay, it's fairly okay. And when there's signal coming in, they wake up and you're back. That's in particular interesting also when you have a lot of speakers, multiple rooms, where power consumption can end up to be something of importance. Now looking at the same frequency response that I just showed you, which was measured with Room EQ Wizard. In this case, it's the GLM way of how it looks like, but I can also show you later how this setup here in particular looks like. So we see the red curve. The red curve is the speaker non-calibrated in the room. So that's the impulse response of the speaker at that location. We do a little sweep of every speaker and record that, so we get this analysis. We send it to the cloud, which is in Finland. There we analyze basically the frequency response, and we're sending back a filter set into the loudspeaker straight away over the software, and that's the blue curve. So we're looking where do we have too much energy that we can pull out, which is the blue curve, and then we aim for a technical linearity. That's basically what we're aiming for, knowing that it's never achievable because we have rooms. We're not in a dead room, so to speak. But we want to get as close as possible to something that we could call a technical linearity, but knowing that we can only also tweak that later according to your taste. Because technical linear doesn't mean equally that it always sounds super nice. When you're in a hip-hop electronic mood and you need more bass, well, we can do that later. So the way how it actually works is we have a software called the GLM software. There's a network adapter connected, or there's this little 9320 reference controller that I have here. And then we run Ethernet cable in a daisy chain through all the speakers. We connect them all up to 80. Should be enough for the most crazy immersive adventures. And we connect a little calibration microphone. We also built that on our own in Finland, so we know exactly the frequency response of all our microphones. And these frequency response, we measure them, and we have them connected to a serial number. So during the calibration, we enter the serial number of the microphone, and then the calibration knows exactly, that was microphone 255, and it has this frequency response, so we're compensating for that as well. And that's the reference controller, which is basically the same functionality than the GLM kit, but has a bit more elevated monitor control capabilities. And then every speaker is playing back a sweep. We calibrate this, and just so you know, calibrating that room took us around 8 minutes to get to a point where you say, let's go, that's good. Of course, you can spend 5 hours and hearing 900 sweeps if you want, but not sure if it really makes things better. Not because it takes long, it's automatically better. So, and that's a very quick and simple solution. So as I promised, a last little sales pitch is these are the models that actually support this technology of calibration. And as you can see, it starts with the smallest of these models, the 8320, which is a very portable 4-inch driver. You can have 2 of them with a kit, and then we have a lot of touring artists who have these kind of small speakers with them in a hotel room, put them up, calibrate, 2 minutes later they keep on working and know exactly where they are and are kind of in the ballpark. The models that we have here, these are the ones models, 3-way coaxial speakers, but obviously it can go very big and even bigger and super big. But the beauty about this solution is that we can mix and match all these models together, also down to budget restrictions. So when somebody wants to build an immersive room and there's a certain budget, I would always recommend add a bit more of the budget to the front speakers, and then we see what we do with the surrounds and top speakers, because a lot of Atmos studios still have to do a lot of stereo work. So left and right is the most important thing here as well, and then we can build around. So that's quite a nice feature. Same applies to subwoofers, because a monitoring system is only complete when subwoofers are taken into account, and they actually have the same functionality and can be calibrated the same way. And this is an interesting thing. That's the GLM software. So what we do is we do an EQ calibration, so room response. We do time of flight calibration, distance to each speaker, and this is important for immersive audio because all the speakers have to reach the unused sweet spot at the same time, and also in the same loudness, so in the same volume. And then if you have a big speaker here and a smaller speaker over there, they have different system volumes, different distances, and we compensate for that automatically. And when we use bass management, which we could also do, and we're not using it here as today, so you know this is all full range, but then we also do a phase alignment on the crossover frequency. It's all happening automatically. The process, we call it AutoCal. It's our own process. And that's it with GLM. So it's fairly straightforward, easy to use. And one thing, because there was a question yesterday about this, and I heard you were talking about this, in GLM we can create multiple calibration groups if needed, up to 10. So you could have one at the sweet spot, but then you could also have a calibration at the couch, which is in the rear, where usually the people with a wallet are sitting. So you can cater for them and have a calibration over there and just switch in between instantly. Or music production environment, a scenario that I know well from some Berlin-based studios where they have on the right-hand side of the studio all the synth and the keyboards and stuff. So these people are never in the sweet spot, but they have to make a good performance. So put the microphone at that position, do a calibration, store it in a second group, and switch it whenever you need it. Because what happens is we just send a filter to the speaker and say, use that filter, use this filter, use that filter. So it's very easy to do. GLM has no load on the computer because everything is happening in the loudspeaker. And also a big benefit is no matter what source you play back, could be a Pro Tools on a studio computer. Then somebody comes in with a Logic on a laptop. The third one is coming in with, I don't know, a vinyl player or something. You always reach a calibrated monitoring loudspeaker, no matter of your source. And I think that is a couple of things that make that solution kind of unique and very easy to use. And just by the way, we have a 20-year anniversary of GLM this year. So I don't know if we know this, but we do that since 20 years. 2006 was the first model that used that. All right, so far so good. Last thing that I want to mention for monitoring system, we were talking about the loudspeakers, but we also have to mention our kind of headphone system, because especially when we talk about immersive audio, and we're going to touch base about this a bit later as well, the topic of binaural audio will be omnipresent everywhere. Binaural means a 3D rendered version of an immersive mix for headphone playback. So in the process, the binauralization is a mathematical model that is basically helping our brain to understand if a sound's coming from the front or from the rear or from the top left or top right, but on headphones. On speakers, it's super easy because there is a loudspeaker, so we know exactly where the sound source is coming from. But on a headphone-based system, it's kind of difficult. And in Genelec, we have an own solution for this, which is called Oral ID. So Oral ID is a process of generating an own HRTF, which is, think of your upper torso of your body. This is important for us to understand how everybody of us is perceiving 3D sound. So, and we're all very, very different. So that's why a binaural mix without an HRTF for me might sound very different than for you, than for you, than for you, because we all have different physiognomy, different shape of ear, different shoulders, neck, skin, whatever. So there's a little mobile app that helps you to create a video of yourself. And with that video, we are rendering or creating a 3D model of your upper torso. And then we are sending 836 locations around that 3D model. We're sending sound to it and generate an HRTF. An HRTF is a head-related transfer function. That means that is a little file that describes perfectly how you look like, or you look like, or you look, a personalized HRTF. And this is ingested into a binauralizer, a system that is capable of making a binaural version of an immersive mix, but it's adding the specifics of your personal hearing system and your shape. So to give you the best possible presentation on headphone when listening to an immersive mix, but by the way, also stereo on headphones. So it's a standalone application for Mac OS. If you want to know more, I would encourage you check Oral ID. We just released a new version 3-4 weeks ago, 2.1, and it's a very interesting solution, especially for people who really want to work in immersive audio but don't have access to the studio all the time. You know, it's kind of a very interesting tool. All right, that was my sales pitch. Let's go back into workflow-related topics. So this is the most simplified studio diagram that I've ever created, and with all my PowerPoint skills that I've learned over the last 15 years, I came up with this beautiful slide like this. So what is it that we actually need to make an immersive system work? Super simplified, of course. We need a playback device. We need a recording device. We need a monitor engine, and monitor engine is something where we need to pay more attention to in immersive than in stereo because we have more tasks that we need to run in a monitor engine, fold down, solo of certain speakers and things like that. And at the end, of course, we have a monitoring device, a listening device. So in the most simplified way, we're starting with a digital audio workstation. This could be a Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, Nuendo, Studio One, Pyramix, DaVinci, what have you, everything. Reaper, Ableton. I think I named them all. Huh? Maybe leave that aside at the moment, but yeah, Bitwig, sorry. A Cakewalk. No, but that's for grey-haired people like me. It's been a bit older. No, anyways, we start with a digital audio workstation. Then we need an immersive engine somehow. We need some production tools, which are helping us to create 3D panning and movement. We also need a renderer. As I already touched base in the beginning, the renderer is the only system in the whole studio that really understands how many speakers you have and where they are in your room, and sometimes also how they calibrate, but I showed you how we do it. Then we need, of course, a multi-channel audio interface. There are tons available on the market. And we have to have some loudspeakers and a feed for a headphone. Don't underestimate the headphone. Especially when you start working in immersive audio, your headphone is at the moment, in the beginning, your best friend to understand what actually happens on the way to the end customer. Because unfortunately, many people still listen on headphones. Otherwise, we wouldn't sit here. But it actually works. So anyways, but that's the most simplified studio setup. It could look like this when you choose a Genelec solution. So any kind of workstation with a multi-channel interface and a GLM network connected. That's the most simplified solution that you can do. In Genelec, we actually also have multi-channel audio interfaces when we talk about Dante or Ravenna, for instance. If audio over IP is a topic that could be of interest, then there is actually a solution from Genelec available. The system that we have put in here is on the lower plane, we have 9 times the 8361, which is the biggest of the ones series, kind of enough power, 118 dB SPL, and then we have 4 top speakers, which is the 8351, which is the smaller brother, and then the 15-inch subwoofer, which for that room could easily be 2 subwoofers to actually have enough SPL for that room, but I think it works quite nicely. Can still follow me? Still awake? All good? Okay, let me know if there's anything. Before you fall over from the chair, let me know. So looking at the different production tools that are available for certain immersive environments. So of course, most of you have probably seen that, which is the Dolby Atmos renderer. And that's a picture of the external Dolby Atmos renderer. It's a standalone application because up to now there are many kind of internal versions for certain applications. When I started with Atmos, there was only an external renderer on an external machine. So now, over time, it actually moved back into every individual element. But the external Dolby Atmos renderer is still needed when people, for instance, work with a workstation that does not have any Atmos functionality built in, like Reaper or Ableton, which are still kind of very widely known. Then the external Dolby Atmos renderer, together with the Dolby Atmos Music Panel plugin, are actually the solution to actually get started and create. There is a German company called Fiedler Audio. I don't know if you heard about them. They're building the Dolby Atmos Composer, which is an alternative product to the own Atmos renderer, and they have a very nice kind of Ableton workflow with their own tool set. But the moment you move into digital audio workstations where Dolby Atmos is integrated, for instance, Pro Tools, then there is a version of the Atmos renderer built into the application. So there's no need for an external renderer unless you check my workflow, because I work in Pro Tools, but I still use the external renderer for some various reasons that I'm going to show you later in the session. But Pro Tools has an integrated Atmos renderer with the exact same feature set. Just 2 little things are missing, but no problem. Then obviously Logic Pro has also the built-in Atmos renderer, and for them it's kind of interesting because when it comes to the binaural monitoring of an Atmos mix, we have to understand that for the streaming services that are available, there are 2 different flavors of the binaural version. We have Apple Music, which is the biggest partner for Dolby Atmos, and then we have also Amazon and Tidal and some regional things in the Middle East and Asia that support Dolby Atmos. But the biggest one obviously is Apple and Amazon and a little bit Tidal, but they sound different because they make own binaural versions of the same mix. And Logic is capable of monitoring both versions, the Apple spatial versions, how they call it, it's their own binaural version, and the Dolby binaural. So when working in Logic, you can actually switch between these modes when monitoring headphone right away in the application. For all others, there are third-party tools that can handle this. But another thing where there is a restriction of Logic is that at the moment, there's only a possibility of using 7.1.4 loudspeakers. So if I would want to run this rig here, 914 with Logic, it would not work because those wide speakers are not supported of Logic as of today. It hopefully changes one day. But there are pros and cons of every format, how they handle Atmos. Then Cubase and Nuendo. Nuendo was actually the second application in 2018 that started to support Dolby Atmos, or 19. In 17 it was Pro Tools, and but it works the same way than Logic, works the same way than Pro Tools with an internal Dolby Atmos renderer. They just look a little bit different, but basically it's the same functionality baked into the application. And just recently, Studio One, which I think got bought by Fender now, if I read that correctly, Presonus. Yeah. So Fender is now doing Atmos. It's cool. That's why it's only guitars here in that screenshot. Anyways, long story short, but it looks very, very similar to the Dolby, to the Logic integration, and it has the same kind of functionality than the Logic version, because probably the SDK, they used it the same way that Dolby was giving out. Looking at Oro 3D. Oro 3D works a little bit different because Oro 3D, as I said in the beginning, is mainly a channel-based system, so we handle it differently. And Oro 3D also comes with a production tool set. You can sign up for that on the Oro 3D website, and then you get a bunch of plugins that you can use. It still has a panning plugin. It has a mix engine, which is kind of the renderer, but it works in a plugin base. And then it's sending it to 2 different return plugins, because Pro Tools, at that time when these tool sets came out, was not capable of handling more than 7.1 of channel width. But here we would need a 7.1 plus another 5 and even a voice of God. So they just split it into return plugins that are connected to physical outputs. So they talk internally between the mix engine and those return plugins to create basically which element shall go where, and then the return plugins just distribute it on the certain speaker feeds. So it is same, but different. Anyways, one thing we have to understand is that the Oro Panner plugin actually requires a post-fader insert. Now, this is a function that is at least not known to Pro Tools and Logic and Cubase. I think Pyramix has one, but I'm not sure. But that means when you stick that plugin into a channel, your fader of the channel is dead. So you have to use that fader for volume, because it requires an instantiation after the fader, which is very rare to my knowledge. Or you can do complicated like aux routings and stuff like this, but just so you know, it is possible. It's not the most easy and kind of super kind of blind muscle memory tool, but it works and it sounds good. It's an excellent upmix plugin, by the way. The Oromatic upmix sounds incredible. Same thing for MPEG-H. There is a tool set that is provided by the Fraunhofer company, which is also part of your Pro Tools subscription. So for those of you who are on a Pro Tools subscription today, can use the Fraunhofer MPEG-H authoring suite with the panning plugin, the renderer, all kind of things. It works, again, exactly the same. So you have some panning tools, you have a renderer, and one thing where MPEG-H is very, very strong is the way how they use object-based audio for alternative content. In broadcast, for instance, you're watching a soccer game, or like we would call it football, but we're Europeans. Anyway, soccer. And then you have a game, whatever it is. I mean, Canada against Spain. So you can have the French commentator, you can have the English commentator, you can have the Spanish commentator, or you turn it off. And this is technology that is handed over to the end user, basically, with a remote control. So you can handle this. And these different narrators are actually just objects that you then later can turn on and off, and also make it louder or lower the volume of certain elements into an interactive next-gen audio file. And MPEG-H is very, very strong in that. There's another company from Germany called the New Audio Technology. They have built a tool called Spatial Audio Designer, and the Spatial Audio Designer is kind of a format agnostic 3D audio panning system, but that can handle MPEG-H authoring. So you could either use the Fraunhofer system or the Spatial Audio Designer, which can help you to create an MPEG-H mix. Same applies for the Sony 360 reality audio production tools. So these are the tools from Sony, and they call it a Walk Mix Creator, probably because of the Walkman back in the days. At least that's what I heard. The old Walkman, now it's the Walk Mix Creator. And as you can see, it's using the whole sphere approach with also sound elements below you, because it's mainly used in headphones. But because Sony 360 is using MPEG-H as a technology. The spatial audio designer can also handle Sony 360 authoring because it does MPEG-H. Kind of similar. To be honest with you, I have used Sony 360 for maybe 5, 6, 7 songs, and I'm happy that it stays where it is. It's possible, but yeah, it's a bit not the most easy workflow, so to speak, but it works. I mean, it's all fine, but I'm not very used in it, so if I get more experience, then I could be very much fluent. For Eclipse Audio, that was mentioning in the beginning, you know, that new kind of open source approach to IAMF. The plugins actually look like this, and it looks like everything else. It's a stupid panner, it's a stupid renderer. You get the idea of how it's supposed to work. And right. Now fast forward, we're skipping now the whole session because that's something I'm going to do like after the break. I want to just give a little glimpse on how do people actually consume the content that we're creating. Because that's something also just interesting to understand. Where is it actually commercially available and what systems are actually there? We have already touched base on Apple Music, which is probably the biggest partner in the immersive world. And they're using Dolby Atmos. They call it spatial audio, but it's Dolby Atmos. And now with the new spatial audio format, Apple spatial audio format, ASAF, they kind of try, as I said in the beginning, they're incorporating Atmos into their Vision Pro ecosystem, but it's actually available on all iOS devices and all macOS devices these days, and it's built into the operating system. And here's also one important notice is when there is an update of the operating system, there's usually an update of the spatial audio decoder. So the chance that something is sounding a bit different from iOS update to iOS update is definitely given. And I remember I had a project on Apple Music on the day it launched, because I'm doing music in Atmos since 2018, and in 21 Apple launched. So we had the first German mix on the platform, and I was listening with a client together, and we were shocked how it sounded. You know, it was like sitting in a bathroom. But good news is it has changed and developed. So many people were kind of sending some notice to Apple on a nice and not so nice way. Maybe you want to look into your codec and check how you do your binauralization and maybe tweak it. So it made a big step forward to today. It sounds much better to the beginning. And that's what I wanted to say. Every iOS update and macOS update might give you a different renderer of the spatial audio version. So try to check it from time to time, how your mix translates. Still, it will change. Amazon Music is, with Amazon Music HD Unlimited, you can play Dolby Atmos and Sony 360 content on every device that Amazon supports, which is good. Their own smart speakers, but you can also have it on the mobile phone app with headphones. And that's one of the last ones that actually supports Sony 360, because unfortunately Tidal has stopped the support for Sony 360. Knowing that Atmos is the biggest partner in that whole thing, but I still think it's good when there are other people and other formats, you know, that keeps competition alive, that keeps development alive. So, but anyways, Amazon supports Atmos and Sony 360. Tidal supports Atmos on all their devices and all their kind of outlets. And then there's something, I don't know if you heard about them, the Pure Audio Blu-rays. Pure Audio Blu-ray is a concept that has been developed thinking of a Blu-ray drive and see how much capacity it has when you remove the picture. Incredible. So get rid of all the video content and put as many formats in audio in lossless as possible. So that's why on a Pure Audio Blu-ray disc, you can have a lossless Dolby Atmos mix, you can have Auro 3D, you can have DTS 5.1, and you can have stereo. And if you want, you can have pictures and music videos and things like that. So it's a high-res possibility of experiencing immersive audio content just with a Blu-ray disc. And they made it so easy that when you use your Blu-ray driver remote control with the color keys, red, green, yellow, and blue, and those colors stand for a format. So if you hit yellow, you know that you're going to listen to 5.1. When you hit green, you know it's going to be Dolby Atmos. So you don't have to have your TV on. So it gets you back a little bit to the times when we were using CD players. You know, it's just the way how we operate devices. We're so used to screens now, but sometimes it's good to have something screenless to not get distracted by something. So the pure audio Blu-ray is definitely something very worth mentioning. And now, since actually last year, November, December roundabout, 2 new streaming services launched. One of them is called Oro Masters. And Oro Masters, it's also a kind of developed and owned by the guys who did Oro 3D format back in the day, so Wilfried and the team. And they are streaming Oro 3D content in lossless up to 96 kilohertz with a variable bitrate. And this is something I haven't experienced in any other streaming services so far. So when you're outside on 4G or 5G network and you're streaming an immersive mix on your phone with your app, it might send you, I don't know, 1.5 megabit or something as a data rate. The moment you move into an environment where you have a proper Wi-Fi with a good connection, it's actually going up to 9 megabit, 10 megabit, and it's moving in between without any audible kind of hiccup in between. And that's actually something very, very interesting to notice. A variable bitrate on an immersive mix in up to 96 kilohertz, no matter where you are. So, and they have a very, very kind of compelling monetization system, especially for artists and producers and the labels, because they send out, or they basically pay back 80% of the revenue to the artists, which is an interesting model. If you're interested, Google Oro Masters, I can highly recommend. There is also a lot of mixes of mine actually available there, and it's a very good concept. And then in parallel, pure audio streaming has launched as well with similar technology, a different monetization system, but equally good for the artist, but slightly different in the back end. But this is done by the same guys who did the pure audio Blu-ray. They now do the pure audio streaming, but they also stream Oro 3D, but a slightly different codec of Oro 3D. So before we move on now, actually I want to show you something else. This is now part 1 of my little presentation. I hope it was still okay. Aircon keeps us alive. And I was talking a lot, but I'd like to show you a couple of examples later after the break. And is there any question at the moment? Is there any question online? No. Are they still there? Please.
I have one, which is largely about the Apple format layer over Dolby.
Yeah.
Is there any control over that positional information, or is that a layer that's entirely Apple Vision Pro, sort of wandering around inside of a virtual space like this? Are you, as a mix engineer, are you coding any information that's then getting stripped away when you go to another Dolby playback format?
Let me just repeat that question so people online have it. So the question was about, do we have control on the positional metadata for the Apple spatial audio format when creating a mix for in the ASAF environment? To my knowledge, yes, but I can't tell you exactly how deep it is because I haven't used it on my own that far. I saw some mock-ups of some tools and some plugins, but there is a plugin suite available. But my last knowledge was that it's available to Apple developers, but not yet to the full public. So let's see where we get there. But my assumption is, and I have to say it's an assumption, it's not knowing, that there must be a layer of control, how you basically do the positional information. Because you have to present at least a size or dimension in which area the user is actually working or where you have position. So I'm pretty sure that there's going to be something, not knowing it at the moment completely, fully. Silence. Silence is a good sign. Well, it could be a good sign. It could also be. Anyways. All right. Then let's do a little break. 10 minutes, I would say, something. Grab a drink, have a water, and then we're jumping. I'll prepare my session, and then we'll go into a hands-on, real-life session that I have mixed in Atmos, and I talk you a little bit through my workflow and my process. Okay. Thank you so much. And one of the best-selling artists on Mobile Records is a producer called Rodriguez Jr. He's a French artist living in Miami. And we do his Dolby Atmos version since 5.5, 6 years. So very, very early adopters, and I kind of talked them into Atmos in the beginning, and they didn't refuse. So now we're actually making everything in Atmos. And the song, the good thing with mobile records is that it's content that I can show officially and also go into more detail, and it can also end up on a stream later on. So that's why I have picked this, and obviously it's also kind of a bigger project of mine. Now, that session could also take 3 hours, so I try to keep it as short as possible. Please, if you have any question, throw them in. I just keep on talking my thing and play you some stuff. But before we go into the full-blown workflow, I would like to play you the song. Yeah. So you get to experience the speaker setup. It's a short edit. It is around 4 minutes or something. Should be fine. And then we go in a bit more detail and decode the mix, so to speak. All right, the mix is going to be rendered to be 9.1.4 for that room. Our fellows on Zoom will get the 2.0 direct down mix. What that is, I'll show you later. And then later on YouTube, we'll have the binaural version of this available, all recorded in the background. I shut my mouth and just hit play and show you a little bit also the screen between the Pro Tools screen and the renderer, so you see what's happening. You see some flying bubbles, and then you might have some questions to this later. Enjoy.
This
Yeah, so that's the mix. 330, it's even better. Quick and dirty. For those of you who already know a little bit about Atmos and mixing, you probably have seen that I was not using the bed. So Dolby Atmos, because it's a hybrid sound format where we have a channel-based section where we're using the bed plus an object-based section, we can see that in the Dolby Atmos renderer. So the first 10 inputs are reserved for the 7.1.2 bed channel-based layout. And then we have 118 available objects. And all the blue ones that you see here are the ones that I was actually using in the session. So the concept I'm working with is a pure object-based approach. And I have built something that many music mixers are actually doing. It's an object bed. So we still have the same position of the loudspeaker in the room as a physical placement, but we're not feeding it over the bed channel, we're actually feeding it over an object at that position. There are a couple of benefits of doing that. First of all, in my session, it allows me to be a bit more flexible with distribution of sound in space. And the second thing is I have a bit more control on the binaural version later on than using the bed. And one thing, especially for the binauralization, there's no difference when I use, let's say, a sound on the left and right speakers only, if they are binauralized, been using in the bed or in the object. But the moment I have sounds like in between speakers, like here where I'm sitting or a bit above, it is a bit more clearer with the binauralization because we have very clear positioning information where this little sound object actually is located in 3D space with X, Y, Z. When we're using the bed, we are actually asking all 10 channels, hey, how loud is that element for you? And then we're trying to reproduce the location, and that gets binauralized. So there could potentially be some differences in the experience between the bed and the object. But for me, the main reason is the flexibility of distribution that I want to show you now. I use kind of quite a lot of objects in this place, but this is also a session, as you can see here, where I got kind of a good amount of tracks. So this is not necessarily always the case. So one thing in particular also to understand before going into an Atmos production or in an Atmos mix is where are we in the overall workflow of that particular song? Is that song already been mixed in stereo, or is there a team already working on a stereo version? Or are we maybe the first to create a mix, like an Atmos first approach? And these two things have a little bit of different outcome and a different technologies that we'd use, and will probably also sound different, not knowing how it sounds because I haven't done both. But in this case, the stereo version was in production at the moment when I got on board to do the Atmos version. So that means I have received a stereo master as kind of a reference, because that's what they know, the artists. They were working many weeks and months on that project. So one thing that could be good for the Atmos mixer to kind of reference to that stereo mix rather than flipping the mix completely and do something own, because that might not get signed off. So in this case, I was using a stereo as a reference. Please.
Yeah. So there's no mastering session after Atmos mix.
The question if there is a mastering session after my Atmos mix. That's a topic I'm going to cover at the end of this little workflow, because I do mastering within my Pro Tools session. But Atmos mastering is something very, very different to stereo mastering. Please remind me at the end, because I want to follow that structure as long as I can, and then we're going to go in all directions anyways in 5 minutes. But yeah, but I do have the stereo version here in my session and can easily just switch between Atmos and stereo. If you want, I can play you. This is now Atmos. Kind of obvious, hopefully, you know. But the thing is, what the goal is in this case with the mix is to keep the same reference, and to keep the same timbre, the kind of also feeling for compression, feeling for for saturation. So everything that is happening in a stereo master, we have to understand what happens there, because to some extent we have to do that in an Atmos mix. But the first task is actually to divide all the elements into, in my case, groups, to understand which is drum elements, which is bass, which is synth, which is guitars, which is vocals, what have you. So in this case, I got a lot of vocal elements here. So everything that is here in this pink color is actually vocals. Jan Blomqvist, he's producing his vocals on his own, and he always has tons of different effects. You know, there was some vocoder, some reverb, some auto-tune, some dry signals, some backing vocals, which is great if I get so many tracks, because I can really play with that. But looking at the different kind of spatialization concepts that I'm using in my sessions, and the first thing, that's also a reason why I like to use the object-based approach, is I'm going to show you quickly the kick drum here. So that's the kick drum. As you can see, it's labeled correctly. Now, that's the kick drum. And the kick drum is now been routed to a bus that I call front aux. Now, the front aux is basically part of my object bed, but it's the left and right speaker only. Then I have also an aux track for the wide speakers. I have a dedicated aux track for the side speakers, for the rear sides, for the top front, top mid, and top rear. My studio is a 7.1.4 configuration, but my session is based on 9.1.6, because I leave it to the renderer then to map it to the speakers, but I want to work in the highest resolution possible. And in Pro Tools at the moment, the highest channel width is 916. So I designed my template to be 9.1.6, and then I leave that to the renderer to place it then appropriately to the speakers, because I don't have the wide speakers in my studio and I don't have the top mid speakers. But it doesn't matter, we can work it out. But just so you know what happens. So this is the kick drum. Going to left and right channel. Let me just take down the volume bit because it's more like for presentation. To the left and right speaker, and it's coming on these object inputs. Now, wouldn't it be great if I could distribute a little bit of that kick drum also to the LFE channel, right? And therefore, I also have just an aux track available in the system where I design how much of that LFE do I want to send, or how much of that signal do I want to send to the LFE. Here you go. Now we're getting a bit of LFE. And the same applies to my rear surround speaker. So if I want to have a bit of kick drum on the rears, you hear it's now coming on the rear speakers. And I can easily just ride it with a fader as an aux track. These auxes, at the end of the day, all go into my object bed to fixed positions. So it's kind of easy to distribute a sound somewhere. But you have to pay attention to that, because when we speak at the end of the chain, when people listen to headphones and binaural, and I'm now basically distributing the same sound into a whole room like crazy, and it gets folded down to binaural at the end, I have to really pay attention how it sounds, because we might get cancellation at some point, because it's the same sound, just kind of summed up. But therefore, there's one little trick that I'll show you later when we talk about the binaural a bit more in detail, just letting you know how basically my static placement works in the room, just distributing auxes connected to objects, connected to a physical output on a speaker. It's kind of a simple setup, and that's an object-based approach. Then, of course, we can use dedicated objects. And an object you usually use then when you want to place something at a very specific location only, or when you want to move something. Now, in Atmos, my philosophy is don't move something if it's not made for movement. So sometimes it's great to, you know, have 200 elements all flying around, but is it really needed for the song? You know, Atmos can easily kind of also distract you at some point, and this is something I really want to pay attention to, because at the end of the day, we want people to listen to the whole album and not skip after song 2 and just fall over completely overwhelmed. You know, you can go crazy if you want, but it's a question, is it needed? And here in that song, I think it's a good balance between movement and static elements to kind of keep that whole thing kind of consistent. But that's also a matter of taste, so I leave that to everybody. But the way how moving in objects or working in objects, it's fairly simple. You just pick a sound. For instance, I'll pick this one. It's one of the synth. And this one is now going to one of my objects in my list. So in Pro Tools, I first basically set up my object routing in the I/O setup, where I design, I can show you in my I/O setup. I have it here. So on my Dolby Atmos page, I have the bed, and then I have all the different objects. And as you can see, I have labeled my objects. And this is something I'm going to show you later, why I have labeled them near objects, mid objects, far objects, off objects. So during my mix, I have this session here. I'm going to listen to that. It's like the main, one of the main synths in that song. And then say, okay, what shall I do with that? So where does it go? What do I want to do with that little sound? And then I decided, you know what? I want to put you to my near objects. Near object means that in the back end, I have connected the metadata setting to render this little object with a preset near on headphones. I'll tell you about this in a second. But basically, the panning works exactly the same than I would use a regular bus. It's exactly the same thing. So that's my sound. And then I can just move it around freely in 3D space. I can engage the height, which is this little encoder here, and move it around. So when I use it as an object, the little bubbles are orange in Pro Tools. When I use that on a regular bus, these little bubbles are green. So you can instantly see, what have I done with that element? Is it going to a bus, a regular bus, or is it going to an object just by the color? And one thing that is also could be interesting to some, I have never used it in my sessions, you can automate the assignment of a sound going into the bus or into an object. Could be for various reasons, either different placements or different binaural settings. You know, that you have a track going on with something where you want to have it rendered to off, and then at some position you want to have it rendered to far, or something like that. There might be use, probably more in post-production than in music, but just you can actually toggle this little button here between routing that same sound to the bus, which is now the case, and now to an object. But that's down to Pro Tools. Other applications might do it differently. I can't tell you how that works. So, but that's the use of an object. And then I have another object probably down here, this one. So this one is also one that is actually then, you can see that it's actually moving. Looks in the renderer of other bubbles because a reverb is open. Let me do that like this, and then you can see only that flying object. That's basically a very good use for an object. You have a very specific sound that has maybe some transients, some percussive influences that you can really also clearly distinguish. Because when you have like flying around super lush things, you can't really tell exactly when they are where. And then sometimes it's easier to put them on static placements, you know, to create a soundscape and then have elements that really pop out, kind of ear candy things like this one. This needed, I mean, this was yelling at me, move, kind of, you know, but pay attention to the elements in the song. The song tells you everything that you need to do, yeah? And just don't move things when it doesn't need to be moved. That's kind of my kind of best practice so far. So, two things. Static placement, easy. Distribution over aux tracks. Using objects, you can go completely crazy if you want by moving them. And then a couple of other things also can be used to create a soundscape and an image is, for instance, with this sound that I'm showing you here. So here I have used an upmix plugin. So upmix plugins exist of various flavors. I'll show you the one that I'm using here. And basically what it does, it takes kind of any input, doesn't matter what channel width it is. In this case, it's a stereo input because I got a stereo stem. And I'm upmixing this, in this case, to 9.1.6. It's kind of like an unfold, so to speak. So that's the sound that is running in my upmix. not running because I forgot here the output. There you go. That looks different. Mix plugins, you have various kind of controls over the flavor of how this song or sound needs to be upmixed. What I mainly do, I'm not touching that much on the upmix parameters in this case, because that plugin I usually use for this kind of sounds. There are, excuse me, two other upmix plugins that I often use. One is called Pentio, I don't know if you heard about them, and the other one is called a Nugen Halo Upmix from Nugen, the company. And they all sound kind of different and can be used for various tasks. And for everything that is kind of synth, string, very lush elements, I use that Illusonic, which is from a Swiss developer. And I mainly play with the gain on the output, because what you can do when it's getting upmixed, do everything on Unity. But if I want to say, hey, the upmix is nice, but I want it less in the front and just more in the rear, you can just tune down basically volume where it actually gets distributed. So but that's the most simple thing of how to create spatial image, but that's not like the main weapon that you're using. That's just one of the little ingredients that you should pay attention to, or look and need and use. That's the word. Jet lag. And that's the third method that I'm using to create kind of something in the room. The fourth method is a thing that determines, in my case, why I'm using the external Dolby Atmos renderer and not the internal one. Let me just switch that off. Yes. Oh, wait 1 second and turn this on. So there is a plugin that I also showed in my presentation, which is called the Dolby Atmos Penner plugin. This is a plugin that gets installed with the external Dolby Atmos renderer. It's part of the suite, and it's an AAX plugin. And it is, I mean, when you see it, it is just the panning, right? It's nothing dramatic to it. But it adds one feature that is very important to me, because in electronic music, everything is very beat-centric, very, very tight. Everything is connected to a beat. And this plugin has a built-in step sequencer for panning positioning. This is it's amazing. Let me just try to show you what it does. So in my particular case now, that sound, you already heard it on the object, is actually doing this. You remember this one? So that's here, this one, yeah? It's moving around. Now let me edit those steps so you see what I can do with this little funky plugin. So I go into edit mode, just reset everything, and then I have 16 steps available that I can use. I want to do, let's say, first of all, I want to draw a line like this. Then on the second step, I want to have a freehand thing like this. The next one is a circle, and so on. Here I determine basically the speed. I want to make it a bit quicker now for demonstration. It's going to sound nonsense, but it shows you what it does. So sometimes that's the case, and just hit done. So when I play this back now, it's actually, I mean, this is mad now. This is a bit too quick. Let me do it like this. And then here you also have like a mirror option, how to mirror those two channels of a stereo track. When I do to copy, then it's actually even simpler, because now it's doing a mono movement. That's my freehand version. Then it's the circle, then it's the line. You know, so this is basically now just repeating all the steps over and over again, connected to my session tempo, which is 125 BPM in this case. So it is kind of a little helper to kind of create movement, to create something kind of interesting happening in the room with very simple tools. 2 weeks ago, our friends from the Portuguese company Sound Particles, that you maybe have heard of, if not, please check them out. They make crazy good immersive plugins. They have come up with a plugins called Beat Panner, and that's similar, very, very similar to this, plus tons of other features. So I am ready now to switch to the internal renderer, because that was my last missing kind of plugin that I need and use all the time in my electronic music things, because it's so handy when you have very beat-centric stuff to do these kind of things. So one thing in particular that is also important to understand, I don't want to kind of bore you too much with the technical things, but this Dolby plugin here is using Pro Tools only as a host. So Pro Tools has no understanding of what this plugin is actually doing at the moment. It's just providing basically the infrastructure. Here, be my guest. You take the audio and you route it out on these particular outputs. So Pro Tools has no idea about the position that is happening in this particular plugin. So there is a little bit complex process coming later in here. Not going to talk about this too much now, where you have to transcribe basically the automation into Pro Tools automation, and then you can actually remove that plugin because the automation then lives natively in Pro Tools, and you can do edits, cut, trim, what have you, and even offline bounce, because you cannot do it when that plugin is active, so that track would be silent. Just so you know that there's a bit of more brain work connected to this plugin, as easy as it is to use, but to kind of create it or to finalize it so we can send it off into a master. So that's the fourth method of creating spatial image. And the last that I'm using, I did not use it in this song, but I can easily just replicate it. Let me check which track I'm going to use. Maybe I'm going to use this one. Yeah, that's good. So I'm going to patch this into a 9.1.6 bus, because I have in my session 3 object beds. The first object bed that I showed you is about the static placement with this aux system. Then I have a full 9.1.6 bus where I can actually use immersive plugins that use a 9.1.6 structure, like upmixes. They go into a 9.1.6 bed, so to speak, second object bed. And then my third object bed is where I have all my reverb returns and effect returns. And I have kind of separated them because I want them not part of my mastering chain. When I use like saturation, compression, side chaining, all the beautiful destructive tools that we also use in stereo. So I want to keep out my reverb returns, so that's why they go into a dedicated object bed that is not touched by the mastering process. So what I'm going to show you now is actually a perfect use for an immersive plugin using my second object bed, where I kind of hand on or kind of fill it up with immersive plugins. And I was speaking about sound particles. This is the tools that they also have. This one is called Energy Panner. And I keep on talking about this for ages, and I will probably do that in 15 years still, if it's around. Because it's a plugin that is so nice, and I do that in most likely every session. So this is a panning tool that has the same controls than a compressor. So we all know what happens with a compressor when we overrun the threshold. It actually kind of takes down the volume. So in this case, it's kind of simple, because when we are going above threshold, the whole thing starts to move the sound, and when we fall under the threshold, it comes back to static. And it could be like kind of a randomized thing. So let me just play this little sound here. Okay, threshold is too low now, as you see, or too high. So I'm going to go down now. You see that it's actually starting to move that sound. I can increase the ratio. And I have attack and release. This is now just, this is not the plugin, this is the room that you hear. You hear like a Leslie. And this is a very interesting tool to create spatial image on a half randomized mode, but still it has connection to a beat that if you want, and it still is not using reverb for the sake of using reverb just to smear things and make it big and large. It's actually also helping us to create some ear candy. And I have also one thing in my template. Let me show if it's still in here. No, I don't. So in my new template, I have a quadraphonic bus only for the 4 top speakers, where I send stuff on it. And then sending this sound into the top and adding that movement. So it's only moving in the tops. So these kind of things, you know, all these little elements and ingredients make it so nice to create something interesting. Plus static stuff. It's very important to still have things that's grounding us. You know, we don't, as I said, we don't want to move things just for the sake of movement. Let me just build it very quickly. It's actually fairly simple because I have here this one, new subpath. It's a quad, top quad, and then you go to the top, you go to the rear, you go here, there you go. It might look different in other applications, so I'm just too old to learn new stuff, so I'm the Pro Tools guy. So now this one is only going to the tops, as you can see here. Let me just kill that other plugin here, this one. And there is still some reverb that I want to take off. So now it's only going into the top front, as you can see, at the moment. And now if I add the sound particle stuff, which is now in this case using stereo input to quadraphonic output, so stereo to quad mix, and then use that little element. I'm going to go to the slide mode, take down the threshold, and then we're actually only moving now on the top layer. And this is, I love these kind of little things, you know, just to create a little bit of ear candy somewhere on various levels. Because, I mean, we have spent a lot of money for the speakers, so we should use them, yeah? So that's my approach to things. And because a lot of mixes are very heavy left, right, and just a little bit of reverb. I mean, leave it. Don't do Atmos if that's the approach, you know? Use it. I mean, we have it. The technology is there.
Did you say yesterday it's better having something than missing something?
It's better having something than needing something. That's correct. So that's a very German approach. Anyways. But you get an idea of what these kind of plugins are doing. And there's another one that I'll quickly show you because you get an idea, especially for those of you working in music. There is something that's called Brightness Panner. It's exactly the same thing, but it is now picking up the pitch of a sound. So when you have a sound that is very wide in frequency, something, the moment you run into a area where the system is to say, hey, pick up this pitch to spin around when you are in that pitch, or or be static when you're outside of that pitch. It's exactly that thing here. When you kind of select that range where this whole thing goes crazy, this sound is not the right one because it's so too flat, you know, frequency-wise. But if you have something that is very wide, or like, I don't know, a guitar solo that starts very low and then you go high, and in the heights you go whatever. So, but these tools are, you know, lifesavers when it comes about to kind of create spatial image at the end of the day. Coming just quickly to the vocals here in this song, because I got many, many vocals. I play you the dry vocals, and you will hear how boring, you know, the dry vocal sound. But when I show you the whole vocal stem, so to speak, it is very interesting, and it's very nice that I got so many different layers of sound and then placed them around. So that's the dry vocal.
Oh, searching for something, and nothing is fun.
Me when I play them. So let me just show you the whole vocal stem only.
Oh, searching for something, and nothing is found. I'm misplacing the moment.
And so you place them everywhere. I'm not a big fan of moving vocals too much while they sing lyrics. When it's like ah, ooh, ooh, or something, you can use that as kind of a pad element and also slightly move it. But when there's lyric involved, I try to keep it static somewhere because it will distract a little bit. I mean, you could do it, but then it has to have a purpose, you know, and it should be purpose made. And in this case, there was no case unless they're in the, let me just check, there is one part. That's like the bridge part. Let me play you that one again in the full mix. this little track. The whole thing is kind of static, but this one is moving a little bit, and it's helping us also to, I mean, we are so sensitive to the human voice. You know, that's for our hearing, that's the most important thing. It's understand speech intelligibility. Sorry, it's a very hard word for a German. And we're very sensitive to dialogue, vocal, and these kind of things. And in that whole thing, it helps us also to kind of, you know, follow that vocal. And in this case, I was using this on purpose for basically the part when it goes back into the song, to create this kind of, you follow that. Let me show you that. Maybe you have a similar feeling. Come back to the main. I mean, a piece of music is nothing else than a little short movie without picture, you know, but you have the same kind of dramatic bows and things. And these kind of elements really help to kind of create tension, to create attention. So you can really also direct your audience to pay attention to certain things and then give them kind of like a big wide opening when the song comes back. So it's much simpler to do that in immersive than in stereo, in my opinion, because when you listen to that in stereo, yeah, it's nice, but here it actually gives you much more things to hear about and to pay attention to. Okay, and the last thing I want to just quickly show you is basically, because we touched base on this mastering thing. So mastering in Atmos has, there are two tasks for the mastering process. One is a technical path and one is a creative path in terms of mastering. The technical path is to understand what's my loudness kind of requirement. So how loud can I be? And a Dolby Atmos mix is not allowed to be louder than -18 dB LUFS or LKFS, which is fairly low in volume when you compare it to a stereo master. The reason is a technical limitation, because think about if you blow your full Atmos mix with 128 channels feed into it, and you have to down mix it to binaural. Your binaural headphone will smoke when you go too loud, obviously, because it's gonna distort. So that's the reason why it's fairly low, -18 dB LUFS. Now, a lot of customers that I have say, oh yeah, but your mix is very low. You're gonna master it later, right? I said, no, that's how it is. You don't have to worry, because the streaming services take that into account and will automatically level down the stereo version by 8, 9, 10 dB to match the loudness of the Atmos mix if the feature is turned on. And that's the thing actually in Apple Music. I can only show it to you in German, but it will be very similar to you. So here in the playback system, there is one thing that's called like adapt volume, in this case Lautstärke anpassen. So when you click that, it'll automatically on the playback side lower the stereo version to match the loudness of the Atmos version. And this is very important. So -18 dB LUFS. Then your mix shall be exactly the same length than the stereo version. Even though you're mixing Atmos first, you cannot deliver an Atmos version only to a streaming service. You always have to send out a stereo version and an Atmos version. And I think the tolerance is 40 milliseconds of difference of length, which is one frame. So it's like one blink of an eye. Okay, forget those 40 milliseconds, just make it exactly the same length, because Apple will reject it, and Tidal and Amazon. So what I usually do in this case is I select the clip here, the stereo master, and then hit offline bounce, because now I know exactly that I take exactly the same length in my Atmos mix, no matter what happens. And the third thing you have to pay attention is the binaural metadata settings. So when we talk about headphone monitoring, and in my presentation in the first session, I told you that Apple Music is making the binaural version different than Tidal and Amazon. Tidal and Amazon are using the Dolby binaural codec, so to speak, and that codec implies binaural metadata settings. There is a little tool available where I can set up the different objects And here I can set up the binaural settings. So just so you know what happens, when you use headphones and you listen to binaural content, the binaural content or the binauralizer always tries to externalize sound sources. When we listen to stereo content on a stereo headphone, a regular thing, we are so used to it that we have everything in-head localized because it's happening between the left and the right ear, which is, sorry to say, by default the wrong setup because you're mixing on speakers in front of you and now you're listening on headphones next to you. No, that's wrong. But we're so used to it that we take this as given, you know. Now with binauralization, what happens is it's actually externalizing the sound sources out of your head into like a virtual speaker position. That's the principle of that. Some people are not very used to this. It requires a bit of experience, you know, listening experience to how also a stereo version sounds externalized. And in order to help this externalization, we have these metadata settings available that we can select per object and tell the binaural system where to render this little object. So we could set an object to be off. So no externalization, meaning still in-head localized. This is what I mainly use for vocals and for all my front channels in an Atmos mix, especially in electronic music. It might be different to classical music, to jazz, to acoustic music, to rock, pop, what have you. But for electronic music, people need this kind of punch. Electronic, techno, rap, hip-hop. People are so used to this kind of crunchy punch that it's very interesting and very important to keep the front speakers, so everything that you send to the front speakers, to keep them as an off mode. So they still have the punch and in-head localized. The other options that you have is a near mode, a mid mode, and a far mode. So what happens here? As I said, it gets externalized, and then there's some kind of distance parameters applied to that object, how far away from your head it shall be rendered. What happens in that process, it gets kind of a reverb, but sometimes it's an kind of not hearable reverb. The near mode is something like we could compare to an anechoic chamber. So when you play a sound in an anechoic chamber, there's room but no room, what to speak, but it's an externalization. The mid and the far objects are a bit more reverberant, but it's not reverb like we think it's reverb. It's kind of a distance parameter, so to speak, where reverb also is part of the process. And that's also the reason why me in my session, I do have groups of objects with that metadata set in the background. So when I have a sound, it's a percussion or a cowbell or something, and I want to use that as an object, I would probably put that into a near object. I want to keep it fairly close because I don't want to have it a bit smeared. But when I have strings, when I have pads or pianos or something, it's no problem to use the mid mode to get a bit more externalization, a bit more spread only when speaking about headphones and only Tidal and Amazon, okay? So not Apple Music, because Apple Music is using an own version. But this is also part of the mastering process, because you will get a mix rejected when everything is set to mid. Because then the QC people at the label would assume, oh, he did not pay attention to the binaural settings, send it back, change it. So change just one to near and then you'll be fine. That's the process, unfortunately. But pay more attention to this. Now one could say, oh, Amazon Tidal, they play no role. My audience is at Apple Music. Yeah, fair enough. But we don't know where headphone reproduction systems might develop in the future. There might be new tools or new streaming services in the future that probably could make use of that. And if you don't pay attention to the settings today as you're mixing it, you might fail on the long run with that mix because it might not sound as you desired it. And with Apple Music, as I said, we are not in control of the binaural settings because the binaural renderer is happening and changing from iOS and macOS update to the next. So what Apple Music is doing, they take our full mix and binauralize it on their own, in an own technology. And the reason behind that is very simple, because they're selling headphones. And they want to make it different. And add value. Now we could argue if that is value or not, but they want to add something to the sound to make better use of their headphones, or to give an incentive to buy their headphones, because their headphones support head tracking. Head tracking, probably known to many of you, that when you move your head, that the sound stays at that position, on the virtual position in the front. That is not possible in Apple, in Tidal and in Amazon with the Dolby codec. So there is a clear difference, and there's a good reason for that, but that's why still keep in mind the binaural settings is important. We have to listen to that, we have to check it, because we might have more audience in the future that we are not aware of today, but they might make use of that setting, so please use them. And then of course comes the creative mastering. People are so used to the stereo, you know, the crunch and the punch and the thickness and no dynamics, and crank it up as much as you can, -4 dB LUFS, okay? If it serves the purpose, fine. Not my purpose, but that's why what I have in my system, and because I'm object-based only, I have to and can do this. I do mastering on all my objects at the same time. And this is kind of a complex thing, because what I did is I have created master faders for every object output. And every master fader has some processing in there. You can use any plugin that you want. In this session, I was using a bit of saturation, the Saturn. I was using a bit of multiband compression and a limiter. In other sessions, I might use different plugins, and I can sidechain all of them, either with individual elements of my session with the sidechain feed, or what I did with this track, because I was super lazy, I was just using a sidechain feed from the stereo master, because I thought, that's thick, that's kind of compressed as hell already, let's use that. And I can show you before and after, because it's kind of, there's a lot of things happening. And what is important to know, in Pro Tools at least, I don't know how others are dealing with that, I cannot group and link tracks with a different track width. So if I would use the bed, I would have a 7.1.2 track or master. Then I would have multiple stereo objects. Now my goal is to have the same plugins on all those outputs, and I want to turn one, and I want that all the others are following, because I'm lazy. Now that works in Pro Tools. I can create a group with just a link group of the tracks, and I can add the processing of the different slots to that. So what happens is, this is now object 1, 2, let me just make this visible here. And now this is object, whatever, near 15, 16, doesn't matter. But the goal is that when I tweak one, that it's actually reflected on all the other objects at the same time. It's more an ergonomic thing to me and a feeling thing. I tweak one parameter and I know that it's tweaking everything on the whole Atmos mix, on all the other, in this case, 118 or 17 objects. And this is possible because everything is stereo from a structure point of view. Stereo stems, stereo auxes, stereo feeds into the renderer, but it doesn't mean that it's not immersive, but it's just the technology behind. So I can play you before and after, because it's kind of hopefully obvious. I can't remember that song, but let's see. So let me turn it off. Now my kind of mastering chain is turned off. On. Let's wait for the beat. Off, obviously. Yes, there is a volume jump, but I don't care, because I have this master chain available all the time and I'm mixing through that, so that's fine. I don't care if there's, I don't care about before and after. But beside the volume jump, there's also a lot of things happening in the frequency band that I'm not specifically tackling, because it's just happening with the saturation and a little bit of the multiband. But it's doing something also to the structure of the immersive field, in my opinion. And this is exactly what I was looking for. I want to have the feeling of it's getting closer and a bit more compact, but I don't want to kind of crash the dynamics too hard, because that I can do that in stereo. But that's the benefit of Atmos. We have a dynamic range. We need to be dynamic, and so to speak. So I want to keep that as much as possible, but still get the same feeling of the music is hugging me a little bit, like you have it in the stereo, this kind of condensed version. And that works very nicely with that principle or this technique. And as said, you can use any plugin in that. If you're a big fan of an 1176 replica, put it in. If you're a big fan of the GOTS particle, put it in. You know, cross fingers for the power of your computer. And because you have to make it 59 times. Yeah, 59 stereo object means 118 objects. So if you want to make it right, you make it on all the buses, because you don't want to kind of get rid of objects just because of your master chain. No, that's wrong to me. You want to use it as full as possible. But that's basically what happens on the creative mastering side. You know, this kind of compression style, this glue effect, this timbre, this thing. And then you basically just export the mix, look that you are hitting -18 or lower, and send off the ADM file. Because what happens at the end is there's a mix that's coming out, which is an ADM B wave. Let's see if I can show you from this one. Rodriguez Jr. We are listening to Destination Lost ADM. So the short version, ADM, has 3 gigabytes. Super small. That's something new to the stereo mix engineers, you know? That we're handling a bit more data now. But the thing is, what happens? So you're uploading that version to your label, distribution service, aggregator, and they will send this file to the different streaming services, and they will create their own version for their platform out of that. So that's, in a nutshell, the workflow. Do you have any questions?
When sending the track to the distribution and all of that, usually, as I remember, sending the master and then you add the other.
How?
You just send like both at the same time?
So just for our friends on Zoom, the question is, how do you deliver the Atmos mix along the stereo version? So it's 2 assets. It's one ADM B-wave file, which you just saw, which is a polyphonic broadcast wave. Think of a big container where you throw in up to 128 channels plus the metadata for the positioning information. That's the ADM file, audio definition model. That's the real world. So you're sending this, and you send along your stereo PCM wave file, 24-bit, 96 kilohertz, 48 kilohertz, whatever you have. So you just send both to the distribution service, or if you have a self-distribution service on your web GUI, you have here upload stereo version, upload Atmos version. But before, you just have to make sure that they're exactly the same length and ideally the same content. So unless you give out an explanation for when you work with major labels, they are very keen, and when you switch A/B between stereo and Atmos, that it's the same song. We understand that because people might move between different scenarios. They're going to listen on a headphone in Atmos, then they move into the car, the whole system switches over to stereo, then they go back to the studio and so on. So you don't want to hear different songs. But I still think the Atmos version, because it's played back at different environments than the stereo version, to me it is okay when it sounds a bit different and adapted to that environment. You know, an Atmos version will not be played back at 140 dB at Tomorrowland Techno Festival. Yeah? It's playing somewhere else. But therefore, we have the stereo version. But anyways, try to keep the content as close as possible, unless it's your own mix and you can decide whatever you want, or you have like approval from the artist saying, hey, I approve that Atmos version. It's okay that it sounds different to the stereo. But that's basically how it works. Please.
If I want to dive into Atmos music mix tonight on my own music, what is the less expensive way? Phone
Yeah.
and build, buy some speaker after, and get
So the question is, what is basically the lowest hurdle to get into Atmos mixing tonight?
Yeah.
So what's the easiest starting point? Yes, the easiest starting point is start working in headphones. You pick and choose your digital audio workstation. I mean, you see that most of them have the renderer built in. You have a binaural output for your headphones, so you can start working in it, and you can start mixing on headphones. But please do me one favor. Don't really, I mean, this is me now speaking to you as an Atmos mixer. Don't release a song that has only been monitored on headphone. Please take the time, look out for a studio or a room, or come here, you know, just to listen at least once on speakers. How does it translate? Because that comes down to the fact that I was saying that the headphone systems in the future will develop on a speed and in a way that we cannot handle today. We don't know how the headphone reproduction systems will be done in 5 years. But we probably know a speaker in a room is still the same. Yeah? Technology of a loudspeaker will not change that dramatically than a headphone system. So this is kind of a reference when it works, and more applications are coming up that are speaker-based. Soundbars, there are little speakers built in, you know. Automotive, all the development in automotive entertainment, there are speakers built in. It's not a headphone system, so it's not binaural. So please work on headphones as long as you want, build the whole mix, learn the technology, but then go into a studio just to check it once. If you're happy, release. That would be my take. Please.
Could you speak to deploying Dolby Atmos and immersive audio in live event spaces? So maybe not Tomorrowland, where you're dealing with enormous crowds.
Yeah.
But we work a lot in tailored environments like this, where you're creating. Our event clients are asking for immersive content, immersive experiences, immersive spaces in museum settings, in event venues.
Yeah.
What have you seen about live interactive immersive, but also just playback of Dolby music content?
Right. So the question is how we can use Dolby Atmos or immersive content in live environments or museum experiences. There is a clear boundary to that, is the venue size. And the venue size is the limitation to delays between front and rear, left and right. So an immersive mix for live application is set up a little bit differently, because you would probably not put the kick drum in the rear speakers like I did it for my sweet spot studio place, because depending on the size of the venue, you might end up with boom, titing, boom, titing. So delays, so that you cannot handle. There are systems that can incorporate this, and there are many systems that handle live sound immersive applications like L-Acoustics, Elisa, D&B, Soundscape, SpaceMap Go from Maya Sound, Adamson has a renderer. Flux Spat Revolution is a system that you can use in these kind of environments. You can use the Dolby Atmos version to some extent for these environments due to the facts that I just said. But more importantly, for the artists who work in Atmos, it is very important because it's changing their mindset, how to approach space in general. And then it's much easier to work with them than on a live environment, on a live scale, because you already have stems, because they provided you stems. Hey, hooray! For some people, that's that's a revolution. So we have something to work with, but you would mix it differently. But some elements of an Atmos mix you could reuse. I mean, probably there's no problem when I just play out my upmixed synth pad. There's no problem. We could probably use that also in a 50 by 50 meter venue. But all the percussive elements, vocal elements, these kind of things, you have to adapt them for that particular location. But one thing is interesting to mention, the Elisa system from L-Acoustics, they also have an offline version that you can use in your computer with plugins. So you can do prep work in your Atmos studio and then use that and go on stage or live and map the other speaker system of that particular venue to see how it translates over there. And then it's a case-by-case thing. So museums, for instance, it's a different thing. I know we have a lot of museums in Europe where people are making specific content for a specific location with a specific speaker set. So that's why you cannot just one fits all, doesn't work. It's always custom made. At the moment, we'll see if it might get into translation things. And when you play back Dolby Atmos content, it is still like difficult due to the known reasons. So you usually make the sizes smaller where you play an Atmos mix because it's been designed in a different environment with a different purpose.
Thank you.
Sure. Is there any more questions online? 'Cause otherwise we could, I think, wrap it up. If there's any more questions from you guys, I'm still around. Please.
Continuing on the live aspect.
Yes.
How far are we from doing this in a live setting? The panning, the distancing, you know, like a live feed, like in a live venue type of thing.
So the question is, how far away are we from doing exactly this, panning, movement, creation in a live environment? We are there yet. We're there already. It's no problem. Depending on the format that you're using, if it's from L Acoustics, is it from DNB, is it from Maya Sound, there are tools. You can do that. Some tools actually have an iPad that they give the artist. So the artist is selecting a track and is then doing the movement live. Or you have next to the front of house, you have a 3D operator who's basically doing the spatial mix for the venue. I hope that we become a third person, that whole system, with the front of house, the monitor, and the 3D operator. Yeah. That's a kind of a dream scenario, because everybody does what he knows best, or she. And so that's probably an outlook in the future. But all the big live sound consoles can handle panning automatically of Elisa, SpaceMap Go, Soundscape already, being it the Avid consoles, Digico, Yamaha, SSL, what have you. It's all there. It's existing and it works. So there are many, many live shows that work that way, and there's many clubs that are equipped with permanent installations already, and it's growing. Yeah. All right. I hope you got a little bit an insight into my way of doing immersive audio and Atmos, and I hope that presentation was helpful to you. If you have any question, please ping us. We'll give out our contact details. And yeah, thanks for being here, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.